Welcome to Deathtalker.com. My name's Molly Carlile and I am the Deathtalker. Today I wanted to have a conversation with you about talking to your kids about death and grief. In past presentations we've talked about the importance of reflecting on our own mortality and spending some time thinking about what death means to us on a personal level. But our children need to be involved in that conversation as well. And that often makes people feel very apprehensive because we're very protective of our children. We want to make sure that we don't frighten them. We want to make sure that they're safe and that they feel nurtured and loved. And a topic like death is a difficult one to start a conversation about with kids because often we don't know where to start. But I'd suggest to you that we talk about lots of difficult subjects with our kids, particularly as they start to grow older. If you think about your early teen and middle teenage children, I'm sure you've all had conversations with them about drugs and alcohol, about how to party safe, about how to be safe in cars and make sure that cars that they get into aren't being driven by someone who's been drinking, about relationships, about how relationships start, grow and often end, and how sad that can leave you feeling at the end of that. But death is one of those things we tend to avoid talking about with our kids. And then suddenly out of the blue, someone in the family or in the school community or someone very close dies or is diagnosed with a terminal illness, and instead of incorporating the kids in that conversation, we tend to exclude them. The adults huddle together and talk about their fears and apprehensions and anxieties, and the children, particularly young people who aren't stupid, they hear snippets of conversations and they bring bits of what they know and add it all up and often come up with something that's totally untrue or totally unrealistic, and it makes them even more fearful. So I'd suggest to you that the best way to deal with this is to talk about death way before anyone ever gets sick. Just like we talk about sex way before we hope our children will be sexually active. So we start talking about sex and how babies are made and all of that stuff with children who are 6, 7, 8. Sometimes children who are even younger when they ask the question. And that can make us feel uncomfortable having those conversations. Children of those ages ask questions about death too, particularly when they hear at school that somebody's grandma's died, or when they see a dead animal, or when one of their pets dies. It brings up a whole lot of questions for them. And if we, as adults, aren't prepared to sit in that space and give them honest, truthful answers to their questions, kids start to think there's something to be fearful of. Because if we're too scared to talk about it with them, there's got to be something really scary about death. And that's the impression that we give them. So, I'm not suggesting that you schedule in a day, Thursday night at 6 o'clock, we're all going to sit round the dining room table and talk about death, because that's not how we deal with sex and drugs and rock and roll. The conversations need to happen as the topic comes up. And it's our responsibilities as adults to share with our kids our own vulnerabilities about death and to frame what happens after we die in a way that meets the spiritual framework of our individual family. And that will vary from one family to another. So for some people, life after death is a very real possibility. For others, that's not what happens. And so that sort of approach needs to be incorporated into the conversations you have with your kids too. So if your child comes in the back door one afternoon and says to you that the father of one of their friends died on the weekend, instead of doing what we're tempted to do and continue to peel the potatoes and get dinner ready and say, oh, isn't that sad, and change the subject, stop what you're doing. Sit down with your child and ask them to tell you about it. How did the man die? What was the response of people at school? How does your child feel? And then you give them the opportunity to talk about their own fears. Maybe they're scared that if their friend's dad could die, their dad could die too. And that's a very real fear for children. So by talking about it, we give them the opportunity to talk about their fears, their feelings, and to come to a place where they feel they can trust you to give them an honest and clear answer to their questions. If you find it difficult to bring up the conversation, I have a couple of resources that you might find of value. I've written 2 books for children, and the reason that I wrote them is because parents constantly said to me, it's fine for you to say that, but I don't know how to start the conversation. So for young children, I'd suggest that you have a look at my book, Jellybean's Secret, which tells the story of a grandmother living in a family who has a stroke and her dying and the impact of that on the other members of the family, including the 2 children. So this is for younger kids, for primary school age kids. For older children, my book, Sometimes Life Sucks, is targeted specifically to their needs, and it incorporates a number of different stories. Stories about death due to suicide, death due to accidents, terminal illness, old age, a whole range of things, and how kids can use strategies to help them A, deal with the death, but B, remember the person after they've died. So both of these books you can access through my website.